So I'm watching this. So this is Fox Business, and this is a colonel from the United States military, and he's going to make a gaffe. And what is the gaffe? He's going to tell the truth. And this guy doesn't know what to do because he's going to tell them the truth about Ukraine right now. And watch this.
The first 5 days, Russian forces, I think, frankly, were too gentle. They've now corrected that. So I would say another 10 days, this should be completely over. But the question is, what is it that Zelensky is going to do? The Russians have made it very clear what they want is a neutral Ukraine. This could have ended days ago if he accepted that. And then they can adjust.
So there's a colonel from the United States military saying this could have been over a long time ago if Zelensky would have just agreed to keep his country neutral. Won't do it. Here we go.
Borders. But the eastern part of Ukraine is firmly in Russian hands. But again, the Russians are not seizing territory. They're destroying Ukrainian forces. That's their focus.
Colonel, it sounds like you don't approve of Zelensky's stand.
Well, I think Zelensky is a puppet. And he is putting huge numbers of his own population at unnecessary risk. And quite frankly, most of what comes out of Ukraine is debunked as lies within 24 to 48 hours. The notions of taking and retaking airfields, all of this is nonsense. It hasn't happened.
He's not a hero when he's standing up for himself and his own people. You don't think he's a hero?
No, I do not. I don't see anything heroic about the man. And I think the most heroic thing that he can do right now is to come to terms with reality. Neutralize Ukraine. This is not a bad thing. A neutral Ukraine would be good for us as well as for Russia. It would create the buffer that, frankly, both sides want. But he's, I think, being told to hang on and try to drag this out, which is tragic for the people that have to live through this.
I'm inclined to disagree with you, Colonel, but, you know,
What can I do? I can't say I agree with you. I'm getting paid by the people who are profiting off this war. So thank you very much. Appreciate it, Colonel. So there's a colonel telling you that Zelensky's a puppet. Is that guy a lefty? Is this guy a lefty, the colonel is he some crazy Putin puppet? Is that who that guy is? Is that guy being paid by the Russians? The guy on Fox Business who's from the military? Aaron, would you like to react to that? I think it was funny watching that guy Varney. Well, I can't believe you're telling the truth like this. What do you think this is, Tucker Carlson show? Asshole, we're at frickin' Fox Business. Go ahead, Aaron, go ahead and react to that clip.
Well, so the colonel speaking there, his name is Doug MacGregor, and I interviewed him back in early January, and he said that Russia was going to invade when people like me were very skeptical of that. So he called it very accurately, and what he was saying was that Russia is not going to compromise on this core security concern. And that's the security concern that we've been ignoring for decades now. And, you know, look, Jimmy, in response to this argument, people will say, well, why can't Ukraine join a military alliance? Everyone should have the right to join any military alliance that they want, right? Okay. And in theory, that's true. But the problem is we live in the real world where countries have spheres of influence, and they also have their own legitimate security interests too. And just imagine how the U.S. would react if Russia in Mexico, back to coup, started sending billions of dollars worth of weapons to fight a proxy war against U.S.-backed forces with the aim of bleeding the U.S., and then tried to bring Mexico into a hostile military alliance. The U.S. would have bombed and nuked Mexico a long time ago. They would never would have allowed it. So we live in the real world, and what Russia is doing has been predicted for a long time. And the question is it worth trying to bring Ukraine, which is a deeply divided country with many people who identify with Russia and don't want to be a part of NATO, into a hostile military alliance that would, in the event of a war, require the U.S. to come to Ukraine's defense and engage in World War III. It's a recipe for suicide. And so instead of just accepting the reality that it's insane to try to bring a state on Russia's border into a hostile military alliance, and by the way, they had to go about that by backing a coup, because in 2014, when the coup happened backed by the U.S., Russian public opinion, Ukrainian public opinion in support of NATO was way less than 50%. In fact, there's a former staffer on the National Security Council that I quote in my latest article at my Substack, who says that the biggest obstacle to Ukrainian membership in joining NATO is Ukrainian public opinion itself. So this idea that all Ukrainians have always wanted to join NATO is a fantasy.
That's right.
It has increased since 2014, but for a long time, the country's been very, very divided, and it's still divided. There's still people who don't want to join NATO. So the obvious answer, you have a country that's deeply divided and has people who we're supposed to ignore because they go against our hegemonic interests who don't want to join NATO. The answer is to keep the country neutral. It's a very reasonable demand. It's exactly what the U.S. would expect if, for some reason, Russia was trying to bring Mexico into a hostile military alliance. But we're not allowed to entertain those thoughts because U.S. media is simply there to promote the interests of whatever the state line is. And right now, the state line is a proxy war and expanding hegemony in Ukraine.
And I just want to back up your point there. Let me buttress that point about how the American media is there just to serve the security state and our imperialism. So this is caught by Lalia. Look, you retweeted it. Lalia Ariane. She says this framing in the New York. Yeah, this framing of the New York Times of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, that resistance to military occupation and air wars is about rejecting democracy, tells me that 20 years later we haven't learned or reckoned with anything. So she shows a clip from the New York Times, and this is how they refer to the wars that we did in Iraq and Afghanistan, which were naked wars of aggression here. After years of serving in smoldering occupations, trying to spread democracy in places that had only a tepid interest in it. That's what they called what we were doing in Libya, Iraq, and Afghanistan. We were spreading democracy. So that's the New York Times today. So that's why that Stuart Varney was freaked out by that colonel, because this is the bubble they live in. This is the pro-war, pro-government, pro-Pentagon, pro-military industrial complex narrative you get from the New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, MSNBC, Fox News. And there's almost without exception. There are a few, but almost without.
I mean, if you were to poll 10-year-olds and poll professional journalists and ask them, was the U.S. trying to spread democracy in Iraq and Libya? I guarantee you the 10-year-olds, by a huge margin, would give the correct answer.
That's right.
It's the grown adults, the professionals who call themselves journalists, although that's a bastardization of the term, who believe this insanity. And it helps explain why we're in the situation we're in.
You know what's puzzling to me, Aaron, is I'll see this a lot. Or I'll see people saying, I stand with the people of Ukraine or whatever. And then this person makes a great point. It says, why is no one... So there it is. They're doing watercolors for Ukraine, right? Isn't that nice? Hashtag pray for Ukraine. Well, it says this person says, why is no one doing watercolors for Palestine? Or for Yemen? Or maybe Syria, Somalia? Or... Never mind. So... that kind of drives me crazy, too. I bring that up. At a time right now where we're wagging our finger at Vladimir Putin for illegally invading a country, we're illegally occupying a country right near, very close. It's called Syria. We're occupying. We occupied another country very close by called Afghanistan for 20 years for no purpose but to transfer wealth upward to the military-industrial complex. No other...
And I mean, look, your point even applies to Ukraine itself. How come nobody was standing with the thousands of Ukrainians in the Donbass who were getting shelled with U.S. support for 8 years?
Right. What about those people?
When that was happening, they just didn't exist. They were unworthy victims, to use Noam Chomsky's term. We couldn't acknowledge them, even though this war has been going on there for 8 years. And that's not to minimize the suffering of the more than 1 million Ukrainian refugees now and the hundreds and possibly thousands of civilians who have been killed by Russia. All that is horrible, and we oppose that. But the point is, you cannot pretend that the war started when Putin invaded. Putin radically escalated it I think he made a criminal decision, but it's complete denial to reject the existence of those 14,000 people inside Ukraine who have died ever since the U.S. backed a coup, and the coup government essentially waged a proxy war against people who didn't want to live under their far-right regime.
And so your point is actually even a better one, because when you don't have to go to Somalia, you don't have to go to Syria or Yemen to get. You could go right to Ukraine. You go. Yeah. What about the people in the Donbass who've been getting shelled for the last 8 years by the Ukraine government? When did you? How come you didn't stand with them then? Because you weren't told to by your government. Because you weren't propagandized to stand with those people then. But you're being propagandized to stand with other people now. You still don't stand with the people in the Donbass. They still don't stand with them. So there's a whole group of people in Ukraine you actually don't stand with, and you don't even fucking know it. But you have been propagandized, which you also don't know. This is my favorite headline. Biden sells Alaska back to Russia so we can start drilling for oil there again. That's funny. Hey, this caught me. This guy, Jason Stanley, he said it's weird when someone wants to kill you and your entire family and you don't have a clear idea who they are or why they hate you so much. That's the situation most Americans are in with Putin. Putin wants to kill us, and even Tucker. I thought the guy was going to say something else. And then he gets to the last two sentences and he ruins it. I thought he was going to say, that's how it feels to be a Russian today. Yeah. No, he says, that's how, wait, what? Putin is not invading Mexico. Putin is not flooding the border of Canada with billions of dollars of Stinger missiles. Putin is not overthrowing Canada and then installing a hostile government to the United States and then funding them. And then trying to get them to join a military organization that is against the United States. That's not happening. This is somehow we're still the victim. Somehow it's just crazy.
Let me quote Adam Schiff again. When he said during Trump's impeachment back in 2020, January 2020, the United States aids Ukraine and her people so that we can fight Russia over there and we don't have to fight Russia over here. Ivy League professors like Jason Stanley, who's considered for some reason an expert on fascism, were applauding that effort. We're applauding Adam Schiff when he was saying that we are using Ukraine to fight Russia over there. There's no Russian politician saying that we're using Canada or Mexico to fight the U.S. over here because Russia isn't doing that. The U.S. has been using, in Adam Schiff's own words, Ukraine as a tool to fight Russia over there. And these people are projecting their own bloodlust onto Russia. It's these people who support actually a policy of trying to kill Russians.
That's right.
Russian. And they're projecting all of their chauvinism onto Putin. And it's easy to do that because Putin is a chauvinist and he isn't a very, I wouldn't want to hang out with him. But these people are exactly what they claim to oppose. Exactly.
And do you want to see the people that you're actually in bed with in the Ukraine? When I say that the neo-Nazis are intertwined in their military, that's not hyperbole. So Alex McLeod found this. He said, absolutely wild that the official Ukrainian National Guard's Twitter account is posting in English about how the infamous Azov Battalion is greasing their bullets with pork fat before shooting their Muslim enemies. So this is the video, and it was blanked out by Twitter. It said this violates their rules. But here's the video. Here's their this is their Twitter feed. That is the official Ukraine National Guard's Twitter feed. And it says this tweet has violated the rules of hateful conduct. And the tweet says they themselves are saying Azov fighters of the National Guard grease the bullets with lard against the Kadyrov orcs. I guess that's the Muslims. And then they show a video of them doing it. You want to see the video of it?
Шановні друзі, мусульмани, дорогою в нашій країні вас не пустять. Не пустять до раю.
So now that seems to be some crazy Nazi stuff. They're bragging about it. Like that, again, that's not, you don't have to doubt where that came from. It came from their official Twitter account. So even if that video is a hoax, they officially endorse it. So I don't know. Do you have any that's it's just, again, this evidence is all over the place, stuff like this, and people just, they can't they've made Putin out to be a one-dimensional villain. That's it. And they can project, as Carl Jung has taught us, they can project all their darkness onto that person. Just like I'm not that. I'm not Putin. Putin's horrible. But what about he's fighting Nazis? I just blocked that out. I say that's propaganda. I just block it out. I say that's what Putin says. Anyway, I had dinner the other night, again, with my old roommate, who's a great guy. And I was trying to tell him that he thinks Putin is just a madman. He goes, I think Putin's nuts. He's a madman. He's going to start the nuclear war. I go, you think he's crazier than Joe Biden? And he goes, no. And I'm like, well, Joe Biden's got a bigger kill list, I'll tell you that. Iraq, Libya, Syria, Yemen, Somalia. And he just looked at me like, what are you talking about? I'm like, what do you think I'm talking about? You know, they're the one. He's trying to kill Julian Assange. He's been trying to do that for a long time. So, and then I said, you know, he's in bed with Nazis in Ukraine. And he looked at me and he goes, Jimmy, that's what Putin says. I go, yeah, Putin also says water is wet. That doesn't mean it's not true, because Putin says it. So, wow. And there they are. I mean, that is propaganda, because nobody's going to sit there and do that all day. So they probably only did that for a few bullets. Anyway, you know what I mean? So that's pro-Nazi propaganda. Okay.
Yeah, and Jimmy, when Hillary Clinton talks about arming an insurgency inside Ukraine, that's what she's talking about, arming.
Yeah.
When you have an insurgency, it's always the most extremist people who will shoulder the fight. That's what happened in Syria when we were told that we were just backing moderate rebels. But
moderate rebels.
As Jake Sullivan, who's now the National Security Advisor, wrote to Hillary Clinton 10 years ago, Al-Qaeda is on our side in Syria. And that's really who the U.S. was helping to support, Al-Qaeda and their allies. And the same thing in Ukraine now. Ukrainians will be used as cannon fodder. The most extremist elements of Ukrainian society will be empowered. People from around the world are already being encouraged to come there and fight alongside them. And for what? I mean, look, putting aside the morality, putting aside NATO expansion, putting aside the 2014 coup, the fact that the U.S. has backed Ukraine in this awful proxy war in the Donbass, just strategically, Russia being there on the border with Ukraine and Russia being the size that it is, has such an overwhelming advantage militarily. So if your response to that is just to try to bog Russia down in an insurgency, all you're doing is prolonging a conflict that will eventually end with a Russian military victory. And you're essentially using Ukrainians as sacrificial lambs. You're essentially using Ukraine as cannon fodder to bleed Russia a little bit more than you otherwise could. And that's just what makes this all the more criminal, that while pretending to care about Ukraine, the U.S. will never ultimately come to its aid and will leave it to be to suffer even more damage than it's already suffered. And so that's why the only answer is accept that this quest to make Ukraine a proxy on Russia's border is insanity and give it up and let Ukraine be neutral. Respect, by the way, the actual agency of the Ukrainian people, which, contrary to the propaganda that we get in this country, is actually a deeply divided people. Agency does not mean you listen to the people who agree with you. It means you listen to everybody inside Ukraine. And Ukraine, for a long time, has been saying that it's a divided country. And the only answer to a division is neutrality. And that should be respected right now. And if it's not, then more people are just going to die needlessly. And it's a tragedy.
Hey, we got more dates for our 2022 stand-up tour. We're going everywhere. We're going to Dallas, Houston, Florida. We're going to Omaha, Des Moines, Pittsburgh, Columbus, Ohio, and Los Angeles. Go to jimmydorecomedy.com for a link for all the tickets for all our shows.